Okay, I'm going to do what might seem like a brief segue, but actually I think it is very centrally related to the topics we're talking about when we talk about Singer. Singer, one criticism I have of Singer's book is I think that he is not necessarily fair to the various historical figures that he mentions, oversimplifies them, is a bit too glib in his dismissal or criticism of them. Particularly, I want to point out that Benjamin Franklin has, I think, some valuable things to say on the topics that we are talking about, as well as on any number of other topics, and a more thorough and sympathetic reading of Franklin would actually add to the points that Singer is trying to make. Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac was an incredibly popular and influential book in the American colonies in its own time. It's sometimes been said that most homes had only two books, one of which was the Bible and the other of which was Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac. It was filled with, among other things, uh, little stories and little proverbs about developing personal virtues and conducting oneself in a virtuous and noble fashion in day-to-day life. Okay, and it's very practical, very hands-on. You've doubtless heard of some of the mottos derived from Benjamin Franklin's writings. You may not have known where they came from. A penny saved is a penny earned. Okay, that's Franklin. Okay, never buy a pig in a poke. Um, that was always a bit obscure to me when I was a kid. I always thought it meant someone came up to you and poked you and said, "Hey, you want to buy a pig?" No, but actually, a poke is that's a I think out of use term for a big sack of a kind that might be made out of burlap and used in agriculture. So, in other words, if that alleged pig is inside of a poke and you can't see what you're getting, don't pay for it. Know what you're getting before you commit yourself. Okay, that's what the proverb means. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Well, that, of course, is not the whole formula to health, wealth, and wisdom, but nevertheless, you understand what his point is. Take care of yourself. If you want to be healthy, if you want to be successful, if you want to cultivate wisdom, step one, take care of yourself. Okay? And among those ways of taking care of yourself, get properly rested. Okay? One that you probably don't know is Franklin, it gets quoted quite often, is the Lord helps those who help themselves. Okay, and I've heard in any number of politicians quote that, thinking that it was apparently thinking that it was Jesus who said it. It was not Jesus by any means. And in fact, there are some ways in which that is contrary to some of what Jesus taught. Franklin's point is, don't sit around waiting for a miracle. Luck favors the industrious, as others have put it. Okay, luck favors the brave. If you want things to work out well for you, don't simply sit back and hope for the best, but take the initiative, do what you can. Now, Franklin believed that he should manage his life in a way where he decided what virtues he wanted to inculcate, and he should keep track of that. He should have a little book where he each day noted, I did the following things that helped me develop the virtues I want to have, and I may have done the following things which would potentially interfere with my developing those virtues. Keep track of it that way. Now, Singer criticizes Franklin, saying that he is so typical of this new American mentality, from colonial times, this American mentality that says that wealth is, and in itself, that wealth is an intrinsic value. I have read quite a bit of Franklin, and I do not ever see Franklin saying that. Okay? What Franklin says is more akin to what Plato says in Book One of the Republic, which is that wealth may help you to live a good life if you have the proper kind of character to make proper use of it. This Greek notion of eudaimonia, which is sometimes translated as flourishing. Happiness doesn't get it. It's another common translation. Flourishing. It means that I have the personal wherewithal to take full advantage of the advantages and benefits that are possible for me, and I do indeed take advantage of them. I'm flourishing. I'm not merely living. I'm not merely getting by, but actually living well. Well, that's a combination of two things: external, and the other is internal. And the internal, Socrates always said, was more important. It's easier to be satisfied, to be content, to be grateful for a simple life than it is to live a luxurious life in which you feel no contentment, no gratitude. Okay, in which case you'll probably be miserable in spite of your wealth. Franklin echoes a view that we find in Plato, in Aristotle, in Cicero, the great Roman orator from the Roman Republic, which many of the founders who were contemporaries of Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, for instance, worried about. What is that? What is that sentiment? That sentiment is this: if you theoretically live in a democracy, or in the case of Cicero, in a representative republic, but only a handful of people have the material means to fully participate, you're not in fact living in a democracy. You're living in an oligarchy ruled by a privileged elite. Okay? Many political commentators in contemporary America would say this is actually prophetic for us. The fewer and fewer people who have the material wherewithal to actually run for office, to sponsor someone who's running for office, to lobby for legislation that they want, to lobby against legislation that they don't want, that's not in their interest. The fewer people who actually have that kind of political material wherewithal, the less we are of a democracy, the more we are ruled by a privileged elite. Franklin thought that it was absolutely imperative that people manage their time if they were going to be good citizens in a democracy. Good citizen in a democracy means more than you're simply earning a living and pulling your own weight economically. It means that you are participating fully in your community. You are taking the time to read, to inform yourself, to engage in reasonable discussions, to go to town hall meetings, to volunteer for civic groups like the Bucket Brigade, which he helped to organize in Philadelphia. He was also a leader of the Philadelphia militia, which was necessary for the protection of Philadelphia. In one case, Franklin went out with a musket and bayonet with the Philadelphia militia and stood down an angry mob that had come to lynch Native Americans. Okay, that's a very interesting story. Franklin, of course, being Franklin, tried to negotiate with them first and reason with them so that they saw the light of day and realized the error of their ways. But he soon realized that they were, let's just say, to be polite, knuckleheads and had no idea how to reason these things through. So Franklin, as the story goes, stood back, cocked the hammer on his musket, lowered it so that the bayonet was pointing at the heart of one of the leaders, and told him, if you try to come into this town and harm any of its occupants, any of its inhabitants, whether white or non-white, you will have to kill the whole militia in order to do it. And rest assured, I'll get you first. Surprised by that level of resistance, the mob turned around and left without further incident. Now, I like to tell that story because that's not generally how people think of Benjamin Franklin. You think of him as the guy who invented the Franklin stove, the guy who invented bifocals, the guy who flew the kite in the storm in order to show that get the key hanging dangling from the kite, hit by lightning, so he could demonstrate that lightning is in fact electricity. You don't think of him as actually a warrior, but he was capable of being a warrior when he needed to be. Now, why am I saying these laudatory things about him? Because I don't want him to be simply dismissed as someone who had nothing of importance to tell us. He had a great deal of importance to tell us. If you have to spend all your energy, all your time, all your thought, all your passion just making a living, then you are not going to be a real citizen of a democracy. Others will step in and run the government on your behalf, actually on their behalf, but they'll tell you they're doing it on your behalf. So in order to avoid a situation in which people had to essentially let go of their participation in democracy in order to earn a living, he said, if you manage your affairs properly, you manage your time, you're industrious, you have good habits, you save, you do this, that, and the other thing, you are going to be able to have enough time, to budget enough time to be a full-fledged citizen, not just an economic participant, but a full-fledged participant of the democracy. So it was imperative that you manage your material affairs, not because they were an end in themselves, but because that was a necessary condition for fully participating in a democracy and for fully participating in your growth as a moral agent as well. Okay, so many people, particularly if you're in the business community, utilize a time management program. When I was working for a software company, the company was using what they called the Franklin Day Planner, which is even named after Benjamin Franklin. And I'm not endorsing them. I'm just using them as an example because there are at least half a dozen products that do essentially the same job. When I was training on the Franklin Day Planner system, you get the book, right, the Day Planner book, and you were admonished, this book is a tool to use the time management system. This book is not the system. And then you watch 4 hours of video about time management. Okay? I won't get terribly into the details, but if you look at your study guide, you'll see an image like this, which is a facsimile of Benjamin Franklin's own little book. He invented this idea of having a day planner book in which you kept track of your achievements, your accomplishments, and kept track of what you wanted to do and what you actually got done and what had to be scheduled forward. That was his invention. Okay. One of the lectures on time management suggested this. Okay. The first month you have your planner book. Every day, write down every penny you spend, without fail. Every penny, literally, that you spend. Okay, don't add it up. At the end of the month, go back and add up everything. And then the speaker said, and then call 911 and tell them you're having a heart attack, because you will be. Okay, what's the point of that? You have a good deal more money. Most people have a good deal more money than they realize, but they're not keeping track of how they spend it. So it dribbles out. Okay. Well, gee, I'd really like to take a week in Jamaica in a normal summer when we're not having a pandemic. A week in Jamaica, but I can't afford that. I've always wanted it, but I can't afford it. Really? Well, let's see. Every day I spend, $3 to $6 on buying coffee out instead of making it at home and taking it with me. Now, if I added that all up at the end of the year, oh my goodness, all I have to do is cut out going to Starbucks, and I can go to Jamaica instead. I'd rather go to Jamaica than Starbucks. And so forth and so forth. I can't afford this. I can't afford that. Well, maybe you can if you just track where your money is going. Now, how is that a moral issue? How many times have we said, we just can't do this, that, or the other thing. We can't afford to take these actions that are charitable or humanitarian or that seem like they are more just, because how would we ever pay for it? And others will point out we'll have trouble getting people to listen, but they will point out, you know what? We have enough to afford that. We would simply have to stop squandering funds in other ways, and we would simply have to stop, uh, the a very skewed system of taxation. Again, that gets back to the making people not accountable if they're already very successful. If we just thought it through, we can afford all kinds of things that we think we can't afford that we would agree are ethically, morally very desirable to do. Oh, but we can't do that. Where do we get the resources for that? Perhaps we already have them, but we're just not aware of it. We're just not aware of where it's going. Okay. And this is not only true on a social or political level, but in your own life. I'd like to go back to school. I just don't have time to study. Really? Well, okay. Part 2. Second month, the speaker said, do exactly the same thing as you did with your money, but do it with your time. Keep track of even small increments of time. How much time do I spend texting? How much time do I spend looking at stuff on my phone? There's a big one, right? How much time do I spend on Facebook? How much time do I spend doing this, that, or the other thing? Watching television. Okay. Let's write it down. And at the end of the month, add it up and say, oh my God, I kept saying I don't have time to learn another language, or I just don't have time to take the extra courses I need in order to get a better job, or this, that, or I don't have time. Wow. I don't have time to spend with my kids because I've got so much responsibility. There's a good chance that you actually do have the time, but as in the case of your money, you're not keeping track of it, you're letting it dribble away. If you were to understand where you're putting it, you could decide to consciously, purposefully allocate it into the things that really matter most to you. Okay. Now that is an important realization. You can take control of your life, probably to a much greater extent than you do. Probably an awful lot of what we do is because we're drifting, because of the momentum, because we don't stop ourselves and say, no, wait a minute, I wasn't intending to go in this direction. Well, Franklin understands that has political and economic and personal, that is moral and ethical consequences. To love life, he said, is to love time, because time is the stuff that life is made of. If life is sacred, then you should treat your time as if your time is sacred. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be spontaneous. It doesn't mean that you have to follow some sort of highly regimented schedule. What it means is you have to know what you're doing. You have to be conscious. You have to live mindfully. Okay? So, Franklin decided what virtues he wanted to have. Another image in your study guide. And every day, he noted whether he had done anything to actually cultivate those virtues. If this is the kind of person I want to be, then I should be working to actually become that person. Well, if I don't do something, if every day goes by and I've done nothing to inculcate that virtue, I'm not going to have that virtue. Someone said to the great violin virtuoso Paganini, I would give my life to be able to play the way you do. And Paganini replied, Madam, I have given my life to be able to play the way I do. Okay, you make choices. Things don't just happen of their own accord. At least, you can't rely on that. Or as Franklin put it, the Lord helps those who help themselves. Now you see what he had in mind, right? Now this is what's known as the Franklin Pyramid, and it's based upon that whole notion. You suggested you make a pyramid. At the very top, this is who I want to be. This is the kind of life I want to live. When my life is done, this is what I want my life to have been. Okay, now I'm going to mention 2 Japanese concepts. Ikigai. Ikigai means basically you've found the overlap between what you're good at, what you will get paid for, what you love, and what will actually contribute something to the world. Okay? If I do this, I'll make a lot of money, but I hate doing it. And it really won't contribute anything to the world. But wait a minute, I love doing this, but nobody's going to pay me to do that. Although you might be surprised. Okay? If you can find the overlap between what you love, what you're good at, what contributes to the world, and what you can actually manage to make a living at, that's what Ikigai is about. Well, what goes at the top of this pyramid? If you give some thought to that notion of Ikigai, you can probably figure out what should go to the top there. Okay? The rest of it is about Namawashi. If you have taken management seminars, you probably ran into this. Namawashi literally means binding the roots. This is something you do when you're transferring rice plants, okay, to from where they were sprouted to where they're going to mature. You have to start by binding the roots. The notion is, we sometimes use the expression "get your ducks in a row." The notion is there are 1,001 details that can either contribute to what you want to accomplish or thwart your ability to do what you want to accomplish. Get it all in order so that all the small elements of your life, as much as possible, are working in harmony together for what you want to achieve. What do you want to achieve? The Ikigai, right? Okay, what would be a good life? That's an important part. These kinds of concepts, you don't have to use the Japanese words. You don't have to think about them exactly like this, but these are important concepts for deciding, answering how to answer the question, how are we to live? What is a good life and how do we achieve it? Well, ask yourself, what do I have to accomplish? I've kind of left the top, and you look at your study guides there. I left the top undefined because none of us know exactly how we're going to have to break this out. But you can ask yourself, where should I be in 20 years if I want to have really achieved this kind of life? What do I need to have done? What do I need to have learned? What kind of personal habits do I need to have inculcated? What kind of relationships do I need to have built? Okay, well, in 10 years, where do I need to be so that I have a reasonable chance of achieving the 20-year goals? What do I need to accomplish in 5 years to be where I need to be in 10 years to achieve my 20-year goals so I can have a real chance at having this kind of life? Well, 5 years isn't going to all happen on the last day of the 4th year. So what do I need to accomplish this year to be on track for this whole plan? Now, this may seem like a little daunting, but it isn't really that daunting if you know what it is you're headed toward, what you want to head toward. And if you don't know, maybe you should spend some time figuring that out. Certainly, if there's any moral issue about your own self-worth and the value of your life, it's got to have to do with these kinds of issues. What should I accomplish this year to stay on track for accomplishing in 5 years what I need to accomplish in 5 years? And 10, 20, so forth, because we don't know how long you'll live, right? Kind of leave that top part undefined, but the goal is this life that you're willing to say, this is a good life. And can any of these understandings or definitions change throughout your lifetime? Of course they can. Then you make the necessary adjustment. Okay, now it starts to get a little bit scary. To accomplish what I ought to accomplish this year, what do I need to do this month? Let me set some realistic goals for what I need to accomplish this month. Okay, if I have monthly goals, I should break that down into what do I need to accomplish this week in order to meet my monthly goals so I can meet my annual goals and so forth and so forth. Okay, in order to meet my weekly goals, my monthly goals, I have to have a weekly goal, yeah, and then basically this is where it gets really scary. What should I do today to stay on track for my weekly goals? So I'm on track for my monthly goals, I'm on track, etc., etc., etc. What you do or what you omit is going to have consequences. This doesn't mean you have to overthink and micromanage every detail of your life, that you can't be open to spontaneity, that you can't change directions or whatever. It means that you have taken control of your life as much as is possible. You've taken control. You're living consciously. And that is a moral issue. Am I living consciously? Am I accomplishing those goods in my own life and in my own relationships and my own role in society that I am capable of accomplishing? Or am I omitting those? And am I, in fact, cultivating things that I really wish were not part of my life and don't need to be? Now, you want to make it really scary? Oh, come on, you know you do. This, okay, it's a grid. The average lifespan right now for women in the United States is 81, and for men it is, I believe, 77. So make a grid, numbers 1 through 77 if you're a man, 1 through 81 if you're a woman. And these are, of course, averages. Okay, this is just a thought starter. This is not like absolute reliable calculations. Some people will live longer, some people will not live as long. Go through and cross out every square for a year that you have already lived up to your present age. And then look at what is left uncrossed out. That's the amount of time, given an average lifespan, that's the amount of time you have left to accomplish this stuff. Now, is that sort of grim and negative and, oh my God, how could you possibly do that and make me think of that? Hey, I was fair about it. I used my own age to calculate this. And clearly there's a lot more X'd out than there is still left open, given an average lifespan. I have no idea how long I'll actually live. So my father lived to be 77, my mother lived to be 98, so namu amida butsu, as they say. The important thing to realize is this helps you to really realize, to really think about the fact that you don't have forever to do this. If you want to do this, you better get busy. Now, if this sounds like some kind of self-help stuff, well, certainly a lot of self-help stuff actually incorporates ideas of this kind. But is it philosophy? Well, if it's about figuring out what would be a good life and how to live that good life, what good is possible, and what kind of harm is possible to avoid, then yeah, it's very pertinent. In answering the question, how are we to live, it's crucial, okay? There's a story, I've heard it from a number of sources, so I don't know really where it originated, but an elderly man begins planting trees, and his son says to him, Dad, those trees won't be mature for another 20 years. And given your age, you're never going to live long enough to see them mature. So the father replied, in that case, I better get busy. Right? Many people think in terms of a legacy. How will I leave the world? Will I leave the world better than if I had never existed at all? Planting trees is a good metaphor for that. Traditional Tibet, there was a principle that before you made any major alteration to the natural environment, okay, say damming a river or digging up the side of a mountain for minerals or whatever, or even plowing a field or whatever, you should ask yourself, what will the consequences be 8 generations later? So I'm not just doing this for myself or for my immediate family. I'm affecting the way the world will be. Am I contributing something? The idea in Confucian ethics is that you honor your ancestors, and that's not limited to Confucianism by any means. You honor your ancestors because without the actions of your ancestors, virtually anything you have today that is good would never have existed. And by honoring them, you also inculcate in yourself the sentiment that you should be an honorable ancestor. You should be someone who your descendants can look back on and say, we're grateful that this person did things that made the world better for us many generations later. Okay. um, rather than looking back and saying, what were these people thinking of, or why weren't they thinking? Or why did they just, once they knew what they were doing to the earth or to each other, why did they just keep on doing it? Okay, Benjamin Franklin. A very witty guy, a very intelligent guy. He was considered, I'll just end before I leave Franklin here, I want to just mention that he was considered one of the great scientific minds of his time, um, proving that uh, lightning was actually electricity, and that seems commonplace to us. That was not really understood. It was suspected but not understood in his time. Once you knew lightning was electricity, you also knew you could ground, you could attract lightning, ground the lightning strikes. It was a big hazard in his time that lightning would strike barns, be a total loss, and that could really mean tremendous hardship for a family. They've stored their livestock, they've stored their provisions for the winter and so forth in a barn, gets hit by lightning and burns to the ground. Terrible, terrible tragedy for them. Um, the cities, as I mentioned before, consisted of buildings that were made out of wood and very close together. Lightning strikes that started fires were a huge hazard, disastrous occurrence. To find a way to divert lightning strikes was a major boon for humanity. Um, Interesting and perhaps illustrative bit of historical context here. This also always reminds me of the stuff we talked about when we talked about the Euthyphro. When Franklin brought forth his lightning rod invention, most people thought this is a tremendous, tremendous boon. But a number of clergymen denounced him from the pulpit, saying, well, if you're struck by lightning, probably God's punishing you for something. So for Franklin to interfere with God's wrath is blasphemous. Franklin, with his usual dry wit, replied, perhaps if you're thinking that your God throws lightning bolts, perhaps you've confused Jehovah with Zeus. But also, if indeed the God you worship is the creator and governor of the universe and all-powerful, I don't think a little piece of copper is going to stop him from doing anything that he wants to do. You could use that sort of dry wit today. Concerning whether you should tie property to voting rights. I mean, there were people among the founders of this country who thought that your ability to vote should be tied to your ownership of property. Franklin used the following witticism to argue against it. He said, let's suppose I own an ass, a donkey, right? I own an ass. Now I can vote because I have property. But then the ass dies, and I can't vote because my property is gone. It's clear that under your suggestion, sir, the vote represents not me, but an ass. Okay. I've heard people argue in favor of keeping the Electoral College, saying, well, yeah, but what about these? Like, we have these huge ranches and so forth, and we have this, look at all this geographic size we have, and they would have very, very few votes if they didn't have this block of electoral votes. And wasn't democracy supposed to be one person, one vote? If there are more people living in the cities, why shouldn't the cities be better represented? I mean, that's really the ground on which you would have to make the discussion, not look how big my state is based on the geographical size I should have it. And that Franklin would say, okay, then the vote represents not the person, but the dirt. Okay. Franklin invented a stove that would, I mean, most of the heat when people heated their homes was going up the fireplace and being wasted, squandering fuel. Franklin invented that pellet stove that can be called the Franklin stove that distributed the heat all around the room, conserved fuel. and was a big, big advantage to many people, particularly people of more modest means. He never patented it. Why? Because he said, no, if I don't patent this, more people will have it, and that's what I wanted. And if more people have it, other people will make improvements to it. Why would I want to say, oh no, this idea belongs to me? You can't improve on it. That was completely contrary to his sentiments of democracy, democracy ethics, if you will. Bifocals he invented, all kinds of other things that he invented, and he didn't patent them because he wanted everybody to be able to make use of them, and just as importantly, wanted everybody to be able to use them. The first public library. Benjamin Franklin had one of the best personal collections of books in the Western Hemisphere at the time, and he realized these books are sitting there on the shelf, squandered, their knowledge squandered, their information squandered, because I can only read so many of them at once. Why don't I open up my library to the public? You can come in, sign out the book, agree to return it in a certain amount of time, and in that way, I am helping, not only helping the community, I am helping democracy itself by helping to promote a better informed public. And thus the lending library was invented. Okay, so if we want to look at Franklin as having a lot to say about understanding what a good life is and how to achieve it, and also about what it means to have ethical investment in the community, yeah, I don't think that Franklin's deserving of the sort of dismissive treatment that Peter Singer gives him.